Welcome to the story of Charles Ponzi, a 5'2" Italian immigrant who basically invented the blueprint for financial stupidity that we're still using today. This guy managed to scam people out of millions of dollars using a scheme so dumb that it literally got named after him, and somehow people are still falling for variations of this crap 100 years later. Now, before we dive into this absolute train wreck of human greed and mathematical illiteracy, let me just say that everything you think you know about Ponzi schemes is probably wrong. See, most people think Charles Ponzi was some kind of evil genius who masterminded this elaborate con, but the truth is way more embarrassing than that. This dude was basically the financial equivalent of that kid in high school who thought he discovered a loophole in the lunch money system but ended up getting everyone in trouble. We got three main things we need to cover here. First, how a broke dishwasher from Italy convinced rich Boston socialites to hand over their life savings based on what is essentially stamp collecting. Second, why his supposedly brilliant get-rich-quick scheme was actually so stupid that it could never work even if he tried. And third, how this same exact scam is still fooling people today, from Bernie Madoff's $65 billion disaster to whatever crypto nonsense is trending this week. But here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. I spent weeks researching this story, going through court documents, newspaper archives, and financial records from the 1920s. And what I found is that Charles Ponzi wasn't just an idiot. He was such a spectacular idiot that he accidentally created the template for every financial scam that came after him. This isn't just the story of one con man. This is the origin story of basically every pyramid scheme, investment fraud, and crypto rug pull that's ever existed. So buckle up, because we're about to meet the man who turned being broke and desperate into an art form. Charles Ponzi was born Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi in 1882 in Italy. And right off the bat, you can tell this guy's parents had some serious delusions of grandeur. I mean, who gives their kid 5 names? That's like naming your dog Sir Fluffington McBarkface III. His family used to have money, but by the time little Charlie came around, they were basically broke, which explains a lot about his future career choices. This dude went to the University of Rome, and instead of studying like a normal person, he spent all his time hanging out with rich kids at bars and the opera, basically living like he was already wealthy when he couldn't even afford textbooks. He graduated with no degree and no money, which is honestly impressive in its own way. It takes real commitment to failure to spend 4 years in college and come out worse than when you started. So in 1903, Ponzi decides to sail to America with dreams of making it big, because apparently Italy wasn't ready for his particular brand of incompetence. He gets on a ship with whatever money he had left, proceeds to gamble most of it away during the voyage, and lands in Boston with exactly $2.50 to his name. But here's the kicker. He later claimed he arrived with $1 million in hopes. Dude, hopes don't pay rent. Now, you might think that landing in a foreign country with less money than most people spend on coffee would humble a person, but not our boy Charles. This 5'2" Italian dynamo immediately started working as a dishwasher, which is about as far from his opera-going university days as you can get. But instead of accepting his fate as a guy who cleans plates for a living, Ponzi kept dreaming of bigger things. Fast forward a few years, and he moves to Canada to work at this bank called Banco Zarossi, and this is where things get interesting. The bank was paying customers 6% interest, which was double what every other bank was offering. Sounds great, right? Well, here's the problem. The bank wasn't actually making enough money from investments to pay those returns. They were just using money from new customers to pay the old customers. Sound familiar? Yeah, Charles Ponzi basically went to Scam University and didn't even realize it. But here's where it gets even better. The bank goes under, Ponzi ends up broke again, and instead of learning his lesson about sketchy financial schemes, he decides to forge a check. Because apparently when your first exposure to banking involves robbing Peter to pay Paul, your natural response is to just start robbing people directly. This brilliant career move lands him in Canadian prison for almost 3 years, followed by another stint in Atlanta prison for smuggling Italian immigrants across the border. So by this point, our financial mastermind has spent more time in jail than most career criminals, all because he couldn't figure out how to make money legally. Now let's talk about the scheme that made him famous, because this is where Charles Ponzi really outdid himself in the stupidity department. In 1919, he's back in Boston, trying to sell business ideas to people in Europe, when he gets a letter from Spain that changes everything. The letter has this thing called an international reply coupon attached to it, and Ponzi's tiny brain immediately thinks he's discovered the financial equivalent of buried treasure. Here's how international reply coupons worked. And pay attention because this is important for understanding just how dumb this whole thing was. These coupons were basically prepaid postage that you could buy in one country and exchange for stamps in another country. The idea was that if you wanted someone in Spain to mail you something back, you could include one of these coupons so they wouldn't have to pay for postage. Ponzi notices that because of exchange rates and different postal prices in different countries, these coupons cost way less in Spain than what they were worth in American stamps. So he thinks, hey, what if I buy a bunch of these cheap coupons in Spain and exchange them for expensive stamps in America? It's like international arbitrage, but with mail. To test this theory, he sends money to people in Spain, France, and Italy, asking them to buy as many coupons as possible and mail them back to him. And sure enough, the math checks out. He's basically found a way to turn Spanish pesetas into American dollars at a profit. Now here's where most people would do some basic math and realize that while this might work for small amounts, scaling it up would be impossible. But not Charles Ponzi. This guy looked at his handful of postal coupons and thought, I'm about to become the richest man in America. He sets up the Securities Exchange Company and starts telling people he can double their money in 90 days. Not 10%, not 20%, but 100% returns in 3 months. In an era when banks were paying 5% per year, Ponzi was promising 50% per quarter. And somehow, people bought it. The early investors got paid exactly as promised, which is how Ponzi schemes work. You take money from new investors and use it to pay the old investors, creating the illusion that your system actually works. Word spreads that this little Italian guy has figured out how to print money using international mail, and suddenly everyone in Boston wants in. By July 1920, Ponzi was taking in over $2 million per week. That's roughly $30 million in today's money every single week. He had lines of people outside his office, all desperate to hand over their life savings to a guy whose previous job was washing dishes. But here's the thing that makes this whole story even more ridiculous. Remember those international reply coupons that were supposed to be making all this money? Ponzi never actually bought any significant number of them. The United States Post Office later confirmed that only about 27,000 international reply coupons were in circulation worldwide, but to cover all the investments Ponzi had taken, he would have needed 160 million of them. So this genius was running a scheme based on a product that literally didn't exist in the quantities he needed. It's like starting a hot dog business and then realizing there are only 12 hot dogs in the entire world. But did that stop him? Hell no. Ponzi was too busy buying fancy cars and living in mansions to worry about minor details like whether his business model made any mathematical sense. The dude became the president of his own bank, bought himself a mansion in Lexington, and started wearing custom-made suits. He was living like he was the Wolf of Wall Street, except instead of stocks. His entire empire was built on stamps that he never actually bought. It's honestly impressive how confidently wrong one person can be. Meanwhile, people are literally camping outside his office with suitcases full of cash, begging him to take their money. We're talking about teachers, factory workers, immigrant families who saved for decades, all convinced that this 5'2" former dishwasher had cracked the code to infinite wealth. And the best part, Ponzi started believing his own hype. He genuinely thought he was some kind of financial wizard. But every fairy tale needs a villain, and in this case, it was reality. See, there was this journalist named Clarence Barron who started asking uncomfortable questions like, hey, if this international reply coupon thing is so profitable, why isn't Charles Ponzi investing his own money in it? And why are there not enough coupons in existence to support these returns? You know, basic journalism stuff. The Boston Post picked up the story and started digging deeper. They found out that worldwide sales of international reply coupons weren't even close to what Ponzi would need to pay his investors. We're talking about a gap so massive that it would be like claiming you can feed a city with a single sandwich. But by this point, Ponzi was in too deep to admit the truth. When the newspaper articles started coming out in July 1920, Ponzi tried to fight back by threatening to sue everyone who questioned him. He held press conferences where he basically said, "Trust me, bro, the money is totally real." But you know what they say about protests and too much. The more he insisted everything was fine, the more people started getting nervous. And then the panic began. Picture this. Thousands of people who had invested their life savings suddenly realizing they might have been scammed by a guy whose previous claim to fame was successfully washing dishes without breaking them. Lines formed outside his office, but this time people weren't trying to give him money, they were trying to get their money back. Ponzi tried to stay calm and keep paying people, hoping the panic would die down. But here's the problem with Ponzi schemes. They only work when more money is coming in than going out. The second people start withdrawing faster than new investors are depositing, the whole thing collapses like a house of cards in a hurricane. On August 9th, the Massachusetts Bank Commissioner told banks to stop honoring Ponzi's checks. 3 days later, Charles Ponzi was arrested and charged with 86 counts of mail fraud. The guy who promised to double everyone's money had managed to lose approximately $7 million of other people's savings, which is about $90 million in today's money. But here's where the story gets even more pathetic. When investigators went through Ponzi's books, they discovered that he had collected about $15 million from investors, but had only bought about $60 worth of international reply coupons. $60. This absolute legend built a financial empire worth millions based on $60 worth of stamps. The court proceedings were basically a masterclass in how not to run a business. Ponzi's defense strategy seemed to be hoping that if he explained the international reply coupon thing enough times, everyone would forget about the missing millions. It's like trying to explain how you lost someone's car by talking about how great you are at parallel parking. He ended up spending 14 years in prison, got deported back to Italy, then somehow ended up in Brazil, where he died completely broke in 1949. So the guy who convinced people he could turn their money into more money ended up with exactly zero money. There's probably a life lesson in there somewhere, but I'm too busy being amazed by the sheer audacity of it all. Now you might think that after Charles Ponzi's spectacular failure became front-page news across America, people would learn their lesson about get-rich-quick schemes that sound too good to be true. You might think that the phrase Ponzi scheme would become synonymous with obvious financial fraud and that future generations would be smart enough to spot these scams from miles away. Well, congratulations, you have way too much faith in humanity. Because fast forward about 90 years and we get Bernie Madoff, who basically took Ponzi's playbook and turned it into the greatest financial disaster in American history. This guy managed to steal $65 billion using the exact same strategy that got Charles Ponzi thrown in prison. $65 billion. That's like if Charles Ponzi's scheme had a baby with Jeff Bezos' bank account. Bernie Madoff was everything Charles Ponzi pretended to be. He was a legitimate Wall Street insider, former chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, and a respected member of New York's financial elite. Unlike Ponzi, who was obviously a sketchy Italian immigrant with a criminal record, Madoff looked like the kind of guy you'd trust with your retirement fund. Which is exactly why his scheme worked for decades instead of months. Madoff's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of promising impossible returns like Ponzi's 100% in 90 days, Madoff promised steady, consistent profits year after year. His investors got statements showing their portfolios growing at a nice, believable rate. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would raise red flags. Just good, solid returns that made people feel smart about their investment choices. But here's the kicker. Just like Charles Ponzi, Bernie Madoff wasn't actually investing anyone's money. He was running the exact same scam, just with better marketing and fancier office furniture. New investor money went to pay old investors, and everyone got fake statements showing profits that didn't exist. It was Charles Ponzi's international reply coupon scheme, but with hedge funds instead of stamps. So there you have it, folks. The complete and utter story of Charles Ponzi, a man so spectacularly bad at crime that he accidentally became the gold standard for financial fraud. This 5'2" dishwasher managed to lose millions of dollars, spend 14 years in prison, and die broke in Brazil, all while creating the blueprint that scammers are still using today to separate idiots from their money. And the most insane part, we keep falling for it. Bernie Madoff, crypto schemes, MLM nonsense, whatever new variations some genius thinks up next week. It's all the same basic formula. Promise impossible returns. Pay early investors with new investor money and hope nobody asks too many questions until you can figure out how to disappear with the cash. The real lesson here isn't that Charles Ponzi was uniquely stupid, though he definitely was. It's that human greed makes us all temporarily stupid. When someone promises to double our money in 3 months, our brains apparently shut off and we start acting like we've never heard of basic math. So next time someone tries to sell you on the next big investment opportunity that sounds too good to be true, just remember our boy Charles and his $60 worth of stamps. Because if it sounds like bullshit, it probably is bullshit, and you don't want to end up as a footnote in some future idiot's cautionary tale about financial disasters. This story gets 5 forged checks out of 7 international reply coupons. Don't be an idiot with your money, people.